My name is Matt Archer-Beck. I'm a lawyer in Washington, D.C., an ABA member, and the 2024 National Law Day Chair. Law Day is an annual commemoration held on May 1st to reflect on the rule of law and its importance to our democratic society. Welcome to the 2024 Law Day Virtual Launch Program. The theme for Law Day 2024 is Voices of Democracy, and I'm eager to explore that theme with you today as host of this program. We're going to hear from a variety of dynamic voices within the legal community today. I hope you enjoy today's discussion of the Law Day theme and find ways to connect with the theme yourself, as well as for ways to bring the theme to your own communities and audiences. If at any point you have questions, please visit www.lawday.org or email us at lawday@americanbar.org. So first up this afternoon, we have a welcome from the president of the American Bar Association, Mary Smith.
I welcome you to today's Law Day launch program. In 1958, the Cold War was the stark threat to U.S. national security. May Day military parades in Red Square and throughout the Soviet bloc, allegedly to celebrate International Workers' Days, were put on to show military might and stir up discontent within the United States. In 1958, ABA President Charles Ryan worked with President Eisenhower to establish May 1st as Law Day as our counter to celebrate the rule of law as America's foundation. In doing so, President Eisenhower issued the following statement: "The world no longer has a choice between force and law. If civilization is to survive, it must choose the rule of law." Voices of Democracy is the theme for Law Day 2024. Today, our nation and world are at an inflection point. At home and around the globe, autocrats and dictators threaten the rule of law. Our democracy is under strain. We must all use our voices to maintain our system of laws and to ensure that our democracy, as conceived, endures. There is a struggle going on in the United States right now, a struggle between the rule of law versus rule by law. This struggle is very real, and our democracy is at great risk. Rule of law means no one is above the law. Rule by law means an autocrat decides what the law is, and then the legal system simply carries out his or her wishes. Democracy is a spirit creating a government that serves all of its people for their overall welfare. It is fragile and dependent on the trust of its citizens. Our Constitution's founder, Benjamin Franklin, was asked, "What kind of government have you given us?" He replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." If we don't stand up and make the required investments of our time, talents, and courage to individually and collectively defend our democratic principles, there will be no democracy and its freedoms for all. Time is running against us. Are we willing to recognize our inactions will be at the cost of losing our democracy? That is the question for all of us. In response to these threats to our democracy, the ABA Task Force for American Democracy was created to look at ways to improve public trust in our election system. Lawyers are essentially keepers of democracy. Lawyers are entrusted by the public with a fiduciary duty to uphold and promote the Constitution, democracy, and the rule of law. We have a duty to educate the public on the framework of governance that holds our country together. As the Constitution begins, we, the people. The political process provides for the people to vote on important issues through the election of their representatives. And when ill-informed or autocratic voices seek to ignore or violate our constitutional processes, lawyers have a duty to stand up and oppose such violations. Education is the best protection against misinformation that confuses the public. That is why today's program is so important, to highlight the key voices of democracy from several affinity bar associations. Today, you will hear powerful testimonials from my fellow affinity bar presidents about what democracy means for them, why civic engagement is so important, and how all of us can work together in our communities to ensure that we move forward as a nation to protect an enduring democracy. I hope this program inspires you to commit to the rule of law and take action in your community. Thank you for joining us for the start of this Law Day season, and I hope you enjoy today's program.
Thank you, Mary, for that inspiring and powerful introduction. Part of what I love about this year's Law Day theme, Voices of Democracy, is the idea that in our democracy, there is a multiplicity of voices that are important, not just a single voice. Just like a choir, I come to this year's theme from a special perspective. In addition to being National Law Day Chair, I'm also the president-elect of the National Native American Bar Association, which is one of several affinity bars in the United States. In connection with the theme, I thought today we could hear some of the voices of the communities represented by these bars. And so I invited the leaders of several of the affinity bars to discuss their thoughts about Law Day.
Democracy is about allowing people their inherent right to self-governance.
Democracy is about having a government that elevates all of us, regardless of our identities or backgrounds.
Democracy means a meaningful opportunity for our voices to be heard.
Democracy is essentially the cornerstone of what we do in terms of the practice of law. It's why we're here. And so democracy really means full participation and inclusion,
where you can fully participate without having barriers.
It is an opportunity for all Americans to be invested in the future outcome of where this country is headed. For me and the organization I serve, democracy provides an opportunity for us to be engaged, not only in the legal aspect of what happens in this country, but also pushing it forward.
Law Day is important to commemorate because it is a reminder of the unique and special place that the rule of law holds in our society. It is the backbone of our democracy, and in times of uncertainty, when people are not certain or have disagreements about the political state of the country, the rule of law provides comfort and certainty and an expectation of how our society and what rules our society will live by.
It reminds us all of the foundation of democracy, which is fair treatment by our judicial system and engagement in that process. And so we need to really get the messaging out about what Law Day is, why it matters to young people, to new voters, to attorneys and people in the profession, because this profession is essentially the backbone of how this country works.
The law touches every aspect of our lives, and the United States is built on the rule of law. It's important for our citizens to remember that Law Day is a special day for all of us to really recognize that law is not just about courtroom drama. It's not just for lawyers. It's really for all of us.
America is famously known to be a country of laws, not people. It is incredibly important that the American people nevertheless understand those laws and have the information needed to participate in their governance.
We have no civilized society without the law. And so getting out that education about where our laws are, what our role is in our democracy, making sure that instead of feeling marginalization, we can start to feel like we have some amount of powerfulness over our future is really, really important.
The right to vote, democracy, and our ability to engage in a free and just society is what makes America unique. And so enforcing that in Law Day and ensuring that all of the bar associations, all of the lawyers around this country come together and ensure that we protect that ideal, that American dream, is critically important to all of us.
Civic engagement is so important for all communities, but particularly communities in underrepresented and underserved communities, because it is one of the very few ways we have to be able to control things that impact our daily lives.
It is incredibly important at a community level to engage civically. It's the opportunity we all have to speak to our legislators and our representatives to know where we stand on a particular issue.
Civic engagement has always been a critical piece of the civil rights fight for marginalized communities. People show up, they bring the power of the law, they advocate to change the law, and they advocate to enforce the law. That is what civic engagement really means, whether it's through voting or whether it's through other means.
Our people are facing a lot of complex problems, both in Indian country, amongst Native American communities, but for the entire country and our world. The only way that we're going to be able to successfully address these problems is if everyone has a voice and the ability to take part in the decision-making around how we solve them.
We need to be the captains of our fate. We don't need to be captive to what other people are trying to do with respect to regulating or marginalizing our community. That's why it's incredibly important that we get involved at every single level. Oftentimes it is national politics that make the news and govern our conversations, but it's often local politics that drive the ways that our laws work, and everything builds up from there.
The motto of America is e pluribus unum, out of many there are one. All of us have a different story that makes up the American story, African Americans, Hispanics, and the like. Ultimately, the civic engagement process, the storytelling of how we got to this country, the history of it, and what it means to be an American for different individuals is critically important to understanding the unique shared opportunity of us all, those shared experiences, and what makes us very unique from any other country in the world. So the civic engagement process to ensure that all people, all Americans, and their stories are told, and the importance of them, to understand where they come from, to understand their history, it's critically important to all of us for the success and longevity of the American dream.
There's so many different Asian Americans who have fought for the opportunity to be heard and for Asian Americans to be recognized in this country. Asian American history is American history, and so it's difficult to limit, but I'll mention two individuals in particular. One is Fred Korematsu. During World War II, when Japanese Americans were being placed in camps and withheld against their will, he chose to challenge that restriction and the curfew that was imposed on Japanese Americans in a case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, that case was not overturned until relatively recently, but that stands out to me as a moment in history when an Asian American decided to do what is right and invoke the rule of law in order to protect not only his interests, but the interests of others who were similarly situated to him. The other is Senator Mazie Hirono. She is a former NAPABA board member and is still a staunch ally and supporter of the organization. And she gives us hope and gives us inspiration when she takes the issues that are important to our community to the government and fights for us and alongside us. And we continue to partner with her in those endeavors.
I am deeply inspired always by Queen Liliuokalani, the last reigning monarch of the Kingdom of Hawaii. She is famously known for saying that the voices of the people are the voices of God.
There are three individuals that really inspire me, and two of them are mainstream and one is a little less known. The two that are mainstream are Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Alexander Hamilton, because they really set the tone for access and inclusion for marginalized communities. The third, Jacobus Tenbrook, was a blind attorney from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s who was also a law professor in California. He really revolutionized the practice of law for people with disabilities and blind people in particular. He established the National Federation of the Blind. He really established an expectation that we could and should participate now in his time, which has perpetuated the future of the legal profession. And many of us are able to practice law and engage now because of his work as well as Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Alexander Hamilton.
I identify as being a Black bisexual woman. And as an Afro-queer woman, I am proud to represent some of the intersectionality that our country provides. And these intersections have the promise to build bridges, to create consensus and coalitions, and supply solutions that benefit all of us, including those fighting to survive and thrive in the margins. An icon of resonance for me is Pauli Murray, a queer woman of color, a civil rights activist, and a member of the clergy who understood that religion and queer identity did not have to conflict. And she built bridges, created coalitions, and supplied solutions to do just that, to make sure that the underrepresented, the underestimated, and the underserved among us had the best that our democracy ought to provide.
Since the civil rights movement, we have seen and heard of a number of African Americans who've contributed to the fight for freedom and democracy. Many know the names Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and so many others. However, for me personally, growing up as a young kid in Texas, there are so many other freedom fighters that engaged in this work to ensure that someone like me can have the positions that I have and can practice in this field. My grandmother, my aunts, so many others taught me the importance of why we fight for the right to vote and for freedom. And so on this Law Day, I encourage all of you to think about your families, where you come from, and where we've come from as a nation. Remember that it was only 60 years ago that some of the most detrimental aspects of our country were right in our face. And so today, I join with all the other bar associations and the American Bar to celebrate this Law Day and to encourage us to continue in the fight for democracy and for freedom.
I can sum it up in one word, which is collaboration.
NAPABA is partnering with a lot of local and national and grassroots organizations in order to identify those areas where we can be the most useful. For example, we have set up phone banks, particularly because we have a lot of members and resources with various language expertise that is not readily available in all areas of the country. We also work with other organizations to provide resources, particularly legal resources, where our communities live and work and where they need our assistance.
We're collaborating with organizations across the country, both Hispanic and non-Hispanic, that are focused on voter rights, voter engagement. We're talking about the real problem of voter suppression that is happening around the country. We are trying to reach out to our community to discuss the importance of civic engagement and voter participation to our democracy.
One of our biggest priorities this year is to ensure that any voter with a disability can really engage in the voting process in 2024, privately and independently. Some jurisdictions are still using paper ballots that certain people with disabilities, like individuals who are blind, individuals with manual dexterity disabilities, cannot independently use. And that means that, unlike the rest of America, our votes are neither private nor secret, and they're not independent.
We are focused in 2024 on protecting the Native vote. That's about helping to ensure Native Americans have information about their voting rights and also taking actions to hold states accountable for upholding laws to ensure that Native Americans have the right to vote upheld.
The LGBTQ plus community has the benefit of having members of all of the other communities as a part of it. And as a result, we view our primary effort in leading up to the election to make sure that we are helping support people, support the members of other communities, ensure that their rights are shored up. For instance, organizations supporting blind individuals, making sure that they have the right to a secret ballot, making sure that members of Black and Latinx communities aren't disenfranchised by redlining or other strategic efforts to undermine democracy, and the list goes on. For our own community, oftentimes IDs can be a challenge depending on where gender identities are. And we've done a significant amount of work through local and national clinics to help support shifting, to help support individuals that want to ensure that their identity is in alignment with who they are, to enable them to vote on election day, given how insidious some of the efforts are to disenfranchise people of various backgrounds at the polls.
Since 1925, the National Bar Association has focused on the advancement of the jurisprudence, an independent judiciary, and the freedom of the right to vote. We have protected, ultimately, all Americans' engagement in the civic process and also the democratic process. And so this year, like all others, we will make sure that our lawyers are volunteering at the polls. We'll ensure that we protect as best that we can the equal rights and freedoms of all to make sure that they can vote. And we will participate like none other to ensure that democracy is protected.
One of the ways that we can activate the community is to make the ask. Many people are as concerned as the rest of us. Many people are as interested in these topics as we are, but they either don't know how they can help or don't realize that they have specific talents and particular skills that can be useful in this effort.
We absolutely need to inform our community. We need to give them the tools that they need to engage civically, to participate in democracy, to vote. Without information, so much of our community is just left blind. And that is really, to me, the one thing that we can do at the HMBA level and at the Affinity Bar level is be providers of accurate information.
One of the things that I think Native American lawyers can do to be the most impactful is participate in their bars, come together as groups and do work together to help our communities, but also be a louder voice for what our communities need.
I think the best way is really to come back again and again to the lived experience of the people that we advocate on behalf of. Discrimination is real. It's still happening every day. And it's happening in really egregious and disgusting ways, in ways that many people would never believe is actually still happening. We're here because there are people in the community who need to access the judiciary, who need to engage in the protections and the supports that it affords that are the underpinning of democracy. So getting them engaged, getting them involved by reminding them that there are real people here who need us to advocate on their behalf is, I think, the most important way to mobilize our community.
The LGBTQ plus community, and more specifically, the trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming communities are under attack. According to the ACLU, over 510 anti-LGBTQ plus bills were introduced in state legislatures across the United States in 2023. That is nearly 3 times the amount of such bills that were introduced in 2022. At the same time, 79% of Americans polled support laws protecting LGBTQ plus people from discrimination. As has happened around the globe, it is clear that these state-sanctioned attacks on LGBTQ plus people are both being leveraged to weaken democracy and are an indication of a regression of democracy. Queer people thus need to be the vanguard against this well-coordinated, overfunded minority attempting to undermine our democracy. That should be enough to get us activated.
I think the best way is for us all to come together as a collective and share the importance of why this work matters and why the American ideal and the dream that we all aspire to exists. The National Bar Association is the oldest and largest association of African-American lawyers, judges in the country. But we have never, in our fight for civil rights and democracy, done it alone. We've always had the support and allyship of a number of different bar associations, including, in later years, the American Bar Association. So on this Law Day, I encourage all of us to collectively come together, ensure the emphasis of why it's important for all of us to join in this fight to protect democracy and encourage civic engagement and ensure that we all collectively acknowledge the importance of the right to vote and democracy.
Thanks so much to everyone who participated in that conversation. We really appreciated hearing your powerful voices. We have one more voice to share with you today. Carl Smallwood is the executive director of the Divided Community Project at the Moritz College of Law at the Ohio State University. He is also the chair of the advisory commission to the ABA's Task Force on American Democracy that you heard President Smith mention earlier. Carl will speak about the role of the task force and its importance for Law Day this year. Carl?
Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon. I can't think of better people to talk about and engage with voices of democracy than people who do it every day. We heard from some of them a moment ago, but there are many more voices in our communities across the country. But what a privilege it was to hear from these diverse bar leaders who represent the tip of the iceberg of the more than 1.3 million lawyers in the United States. Each of us took an oath to support the Constitution of the United States and to support the Constitution of the state where we practice. We uphold the rule of law and our democracy. We profess justice. Sadly, 25% of American adults can name only one of three branches of government. 20% of American adults can't name a single branch of government. And less than 1/3 of millennials, those between ages 27 and 42, consider it essential to live in a democracy. We owe it to the next generation to do better. We owe it to this generation to do better. And the time to do so starts now. Now, as Matt explained, I'm with the Divided Community Project at the Moritz College of Law, and Mary Smith asked me to chair the advisory commission to the Task Force on American Democracy. Let me explain each of those to you. The Divided Community Project exists to help community leaders address conflict, race, religion, political polarization, you name it. And we do it in a number of ways. And one of the recent publications we issued was called Speaking Out to Strengthen the Guardrails of Democracy. So when we talk about voices of democracy, this is a tool written for non-lawyers, written for teachers and community members and others, but also for lawyers, to make sure that they can speak on a nonpartisan and cross-partisan basis about how we got here, what the checklists are, what the markers are for authoritarianism and a slide away from democracy, ways to identify and counter threats to democracy, and how to speak out on that subject. The ABA Task Force on Democracy is holding listening tours in states around the country, in 7 states. And they are talking about ways that we can inform the public about the security of our election process and the guardrails to our democracy. The task force is led by Judge Michael Luttig and Jay Johnson, a former Homeland Security Secretary. It is a bipartisan, diverse group of 30 leading Americans, including 2 former presidential candidates, law school deans, election law experts, retired judges, and national security experts. The advisory commission to the task force that I lead is a bipartisan, diverse group of 30 geographically dispersed ABA leaders from state, local, national bars, sections, divisions, and forums, and standing committees, and 3 former ABA presidents. With those resources, we can offer you program ideas, resources, speakers, and other materials, just as well as, well, not just as well, the Committee on Public Education of the ABA does this all the time and does it better. But we certainly have resources to assist you in speaking out on subjects related to democracy and make sure that your voices are heard. So let me sum up by saying this. What we're asking you to do is to speak out to support the rule of law and democracy to each other, to other bar association members, to elected officials, and to the public in your community, to your neighbors and to teachers and book groups and Rotaries and Sertomas and other groups. Second, collaborate with bar associations and lawyers around the country. The American Bar Association, state and local bar associations, affinity bar associations, Inns of Court, and others will collaborate with you to bring programming forward and to lift the voices of lawyers in support of the rule of law and our democracy. Please reach out to us to do so. The website that we use is ambar.org/democracy. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, it doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter in what area of law you practice. It doesn't matter whether you're in a red state or a blue state or a purple state, whether you identify as a Republican or a Democrat or independent. This is about using our voices to restore trust in our democracy and the rule of law we have sworn to protect. Let's make sure that when the next Law Day comes around in 2025, that we have been certain to tell the story about American democracy, that we have stood up, we've stood together, and we've spoken out in support of the rule of law and strengthened the guardrails of our democracy. Thanks.
Before we end today, just a reminder that Law Day is May 1st, and no matter where you're coming from, there are opportunities to engage with Law Day in 2024. The ABA offers many resources for planning, participating in, or sharing your Law Day programs. Please join us for upcoming programs on April 23rd, when ABA Media Relations and Strategic Communications will release their 2024 Survey of Civic Literacy, on April 25th, in partnership with the Law Library of Congress, and on May 1st for a Law Day program headlined by the co-chairs of the ABA Task Force for American Democracy, Judge Michael Ludig and Secretary Jay Johnson. In addition, we encourage you to participate in Law Day activities in your own community, whether you plan to volunteer in a classroom, get your governor or other elected officials to issue a Law Day proclamation, or plan a different kind of program. You will find helpful resources at www.lawday.org. Thank you for joining us and happy planning for Law Day 2024.